On March 25th, 2021, Governor Brian Kemp signed into law the Georgia Integrity Elections Act, also known as SB 202. Now, many opponents of that bill are claiming it to be racist, are claiming that it's going to prevent non-white people, minorities, of voting, or trying to keep them from voting in the polls or any election from here on out. It's claimed to give the GOP way too much power, so forth and so on. Joe Biden has come out on those claims on March 25th, the day that it was signed, and on the day after, and a few times after that as well. Stacey Abrams, who has been probably the most vocal about the opposition to this bill, has claimed that it is a redux of Jim Crow in a suit and tie. Well, that's some pretty strong language and some pretty strong claims to a voting bill that's only a few weeks old, and that takes effect very soon here. So, do their claims hold the water? What are the facts of the Georgia voting law, and how does it compare to other blue states and to other states that are Democrat hold? How does this law hold up? Is it really a racist law? Does it really prevent black people or any non-white person from voting? Well, let's get into the facts. The Washington Post ran a headline, and in that headline it says, Biden falsely claims the new Georgia law ends voting hours early. That is according to the Washington Post. The Washington Post gave him 4 Pinocchios on this particular claim in the 2 quotes that we're going to refer to here in just a second. Now, before I go any further, understand that all of the material, all of the sources that I use in this particular video are linked down below in the description section. I do use certain clips in certain parts of the article, but the entire article, everything that I'm using in this video is linked down in the description section. So the research I have done and all I have heard is down there below. You could check it out and do your own homework. Again, don't take my word for it. I don't want you to believe me. I want you to do your own homework and come up to your own conclusion. Here, I'm just presenting you what I found and what my conclusions are. Okay, so that's the headline from the Washington Post. So what did Biden actually say that got him 4 Pinocchios from the Washington Post, which is a left-leaning newspaper site, left-leaning news outlet? Here are 2 of his quotes. What I'm worried about is how un-American this whole initiative is. It's sick. It's sick. Deciding that you're going to end voting at 5 o'clock when working people are just getting off of work. That is on March 25th. Remember, Brian Kemp signed the law on March 25th. Did this quote come before the signing of the law? Did it come after the signing of the law? I'm not sure, but it came on the same day. Also, the other quote that the Washington Post fact-checked. Among the outrageous parts of the new state law, it ends voting hours early so working people can't cast their vote after their shift is over. That was on March 26th. Now, he said the first time on the 25th, and then he doubled down again on it on March 26th. So, is that true? Did Georgia end or do they do the early voting hours and reduce it to only working time hours so that working people, regardless of race, just can't get to the polls in time to early vote? Well, we're going to look at that in a second. Let's look at what Stacey Abrams is claiming, which is one of the bigger vocals opposing this particular bill. According to CNN, in a CNN article, Stacey Abrams on Sunday lambasted efforts by Republicans to restrict voting rights in Georgia, calling it racist and a redux of Jim Crow in a suit and tie. That's some pretty strong language, and that's some pretty strong claim there by Stacey Abrams. But then again, I never put it past her for this kind of rhetoric, because that's exactly right up her alley. Just claim the strongest rhetoric possible and just hoping people buy it without ever questioning it. Well, guess what? You made the claims, and I'm going to question it. So let's see. An article 1 from the Washington Post, which you can see linked down below. In this particular article, here's a quote from a University of Georgia professor stating what he read on this bill. You can criticize the bill for many things, but I don't think you can criticize it for reducing the hours you can vote, said the University of Georgia political scientist Charles S. Bullock III. He speculated, the professor speculated that Biden may have been briefed on an early version of the bill. there were 25 versions floating around, and he did not get an update on the final version. Is that possible? Sure, you can give the benefit of the doubt that, the versions that were floating around, he happened to get a version of the bill, and this is what came out, and that's what he was speaking on before Brian Kemp signed the bill. So I'm going to give a little bit of the benefit of the doubt to Joe Biden and say he made that claim on March 25th before Governor Kemp signed the final bill. So maybe Biden didn't get the full final version in his hands for him to read or for his advisors to advise him on. Is it possible? I'll give him the benefit of the doubt on that. Let's go ahead. Remember quote number 2, where he doubles down on that same claim. Well, here is another quote from the same article from the Washington Post that gave Joe Biden 4 Pinocchios, claiming it reduces hours. Charles Stewart III, an election expert at MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, said, "I had also heard this generally reported as expanding early voting. So I'm surprised by the characterization. The characterization that it reduces hours. No, I heard about it's expanding hours. He studied the precise language changes at our request and said it indicated an expansion of hours, especially in the rural counties." So the Washington Post reached out to this professor at MIT, who's on record by name, and the guy said, "I don't understand how you're characterizing this as reducing hours. It actually expands hours." I studied the law, and he reported back to the Washington Post as, no, they're expanding the hours, especially in the rural counties where it's a little harder to get the poll workers because the population is when you go outside of Cobb County and Fulton County, the population is more spread out versus in that city and around Atlanta. Okay, so what are the major bullet points of the SB 202, the Integrity Election Act? What are the major bullet points? So here we have the major bullet points of the SB 202. As you can see here, Georgia, 17 days of early voting, allows no excuse to vote by mail. That just means that you don't have to have an excuse to vote by mail. If you want to vote by mail, you vote by mail. You don't have to tell the state why you want to vote by mail. That's very important, and just hold on to that thought in just a few moments. You need valid ID required to vote by mail or in person. That should be universal. That should be across all 50 states. Voter ID showing identification, proper state government issued identification, should never ever be a point of contention. It should never be a controversial statement or stance. You need an ID to do anything, and we'll get to that a little bit later as well. It also bans the passing out of food and water to line within 150 feet, but allows unattended water receptacles. So that last one actually made me think. I'm like, what do you mean? They banned water? You can't just pass out food and water? And I had to do a little research on that because of all the years that I've been voting since about 2000. I turned 18 a few weeks before the election. I don't remember if I actually voted in 2000, so I'm just going to go ahead and say I started voting in 2004. Since 2004, I started voting in elections, and I have never encountered any kind of people passing out water and food in lines. I have stood in line for over 2 hours to vote, especially in 2012 in Obama's re-election. In early voting, I stood outside in Aventura for over 2 hours. Nobody complained. Nobody was claiming anything. Nobody had any problem. I don't even know what the law was at that point in Florida regarding handing out water and food or drink or whatever. None of my business. I know if I was thirsty, either I get out of line or I brought something with me. Not hard, right? So let's go ahead and take a look at that last one, that bans out the passing food, because that seems to be a major sticking point for the left. That's what they kind of latched onto, the voter ID and this, because they claim that it's racist and it disenfranchises voters. You'll see here for yourself. The National Review actually did an article on this. Here you have the National Review headline saying the Democrats' abuses prompted Georgia voting law food and drink rule. So because the Democrat people who were I'm not going to say they were directly told by the candidate. There are people campaigning on behalf of the candidate, whether directly, indirectly, whatever. They had the paraphernalia, the buttons and the shirts and everything. They were passing out food and water and whatever they were passing out. Okay, so what exactly happened? What exactly is this about? Because me personally, up until this point, I didn't see it as a big deal. I'm like, okay, I had to research a little bit more. I had to read a little bit more on this. So I read this particular article that's linked down below. And here's one of the articles, and here's one of the excerpts from that particular article. A Republican effort to rein in the practice known as line warming by clarifying that the law prohibits offering any gifts, including food and drink, within 150 feet of polling location may be the most controversial, misunderstood, and mischaracterized provision of Georgia's new voting security law. Left-wing critics have seized on the food or drink provision to characterize the law as a racist attempt to disenfranchise minority voters and to essentially punish them for denying them refreshments while they're waiting in line. And you can go ahead and read the rest. When I read that, I actually had to read that a few times to make sure I really read that correctly. By banning food and drink, you're punishing minorities? You're disenfranchising voters? Ladies and gentlemen, I don't care what side of the political aisle you're on. I don't care what skin color you have. If you really believe that the inability of a person to pass out food and drink or water or whatever is disenfranchisement, is basically a way to keep people from voting, minority people from voting, non-white people from voting, you are either that gullible to believe it, or you're that intellectually lazy or stupid to actually believe it. There's no middle ground here, okay? Let me make my case in point. Of every time a non-white person has ever gone to Disney World or Disneyland or Universal Studios and wanted to go on a new ride, when a new ride comes out, like that in Harry Potter over at Universal, or the new Incredible Hulk when it came out in Universal, or the Frozen ride over in Disney, the line was 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours long. Yeah, the waiting in line stinks. Nobody wants to wait in line. You just want to go up. It's instant gratification. But did the park itself hand out food and drink and water to those in line because they didn't want to disenfranchise riders? Because they didn't want to make people feel like we're trying to keep non-white people from riding a ride? No, people got in line and they waited in line until they got on their turn to ride the ride, which was about 2-3 minutes long. So you waited 6 hours to do something that was about 2 or 3 minutes long. Nobody screamed racism. Nobody said, oh, you're trying to disenfranchise me because I'm a non-white and I feel like you're trying to keep me from riding the ride because you're not allowing the people to come and give me food and drink. And you're not giving me food and drink for free. Really? But being able to hand out food and drink from political activists, as you could call them, as people who are campaigning on behalf of a particular candidate because they're not able to hand you a bottle of water or a slice of pizza or whatever, that's disenfranchisement? I'm sorry, but if you can't figure out when to vote, how to vote, to bring an umbrella if you know there's going to be in line because you just want to keep some shade, if you can't bring a cup with you, water, a bottle of water, or some kind of stainless steel cup that you can put ice in there and it stays cold for a long time, if you can't figure that out for yourself, you have far bigger issues to worry about than worrying about if you could be given a bottle of water in line by somebody wearing a Republican or a Democrat button. That just means that you're so gullible and stupid that I don't know what to tell you, okay? Now, this is actually the first time I've actually heard of the term line warming. And it got me interested, and the article is actually very interesting. I encourage you to go ahead and read the rest of the article. It's listed down below. So let's show, so maybe the GA law banning the food and drink at least 150 feet from the line, maybe that's a bit unreasonable. Maybe they're the only state that does it. Or maybe that just because they're traditionally a red state, Maybe it's only red states that does this. Well, let's take a quick look. Georgia and New York. Look at the last one there. Georgia, like I said, bans passing out of food and water to line within 150 feet, but allows unattended water receptacles. I think that's completely reasonable and fair. New York bans passing out food and water unless it's under $1 in value and there's no ID for who supplied it. All right. I have no idea what you're going to find in New York that you're going to pass out to people in a voting line that costs $1 or under $1. I don't know what that's going to be because everything in New York is already expensive enough and taxed up the yin yang already. So I don't know if you could find something under $1 that you're going to give out to the people in line, go for it. All right. But it also says, and there's no ID for who supplied it. What? That's just extremely stupid. So Georgia bans it 150 feet, but the voting place could actually have a table with a water receptacle with some cups, and you could come help and serve yourself. No problem. New York, a very staunch Democrat blue state, does the same thing, except if you could find something under $1. Okay, so we know that the whole handing out of food and water and banning all that, that's not racist. That's not a Republican thing. In fact, they actually said that they actually looked at the New York law and kind of mirrored and copied it to a certain degree, okay, just made like little changes. But 150 feet or $1, same thing. I mean, come on, really? So perhaps the racist thing in this particular voting bill is the early voting. Maybe, just maybe, the early voting is what's keeping people from getting to the polls. Maybe Georgia reduced the days or got rid of early voting altogether. Now, if you paid attention to the couple of slides before, you know that's not the case. But we know people don't like to pay attention. They're all emotional. They get emotional and they're so, full of it that they can't see beyond the front nose. So let's go ahead and take a look and compare Georgia to other states, specifically blue states. So here we have Georgia comparing against blue states' election laws. Georgia, 17 days prior to the election. 17 days before general election. 2 Saturdays and 2 Sundays included. At least 8 hours, the poll will be out. It has to be open and can range, those 8 hours at minimum can start as early as 7 a.m. and end as late as 7 p.m. Again, even if the polling site in your particular area, county, city, whatever, is only open for 8 hours a day, you have 17 straight days to figure out when you could vote, where you could vote, and and strategize all that. In fact, you have between now and 2022, when the midterms come, 2024 is the next general election. You can't figure that out. You can't say, hey boss, I like the day off, or take a half a day off, or I'm gonna use my lunch hour to go over there, or hey, maybe the 2 days that you have off of work, or even if it's just 1 day off of work, you're not going to take out the time to go vote because it's an inconvenience for you somehow because you'd rather be doing something else. Well, that's your problem, not mine. Okay, so it codified drop boxes into law, basically just meaning that the drop boxes for people who want to vote by mail, or who are going to get pre-vote, not wait in line. The boxes are going to be there at the polling site. You can walk up, verify who you are, show your ID, drop it in, and you leave. That's not racist in any way, shape, or form. It doesn't say only white people can do this. Only non-white people cannot do this. It just makes it so that it's far more secure and far more, the election has the integrity that it needs to have and has to have in order for us to actually have the voting system here in the United States being trustworthy. So let's look at New York. Only 9 days of early voting. That's a lot less than 17. Delaware, no in-person. Pennsylvania and Rhode Island, only regular business hours. So assuming 8 to 4, 9 to 5 type of deal. New Hampshire, no early voting. Connecticut, no early voting. Oregon, no Sunday early voting. So now you're limited to one weekend day, which is Saturday. Now you're limited. Now if you have Saturdays and Sundays off, you're limited to just that one day because they won't do it on Sundays. Hawaii, no Sunday early voting, along with Oregon. Colorado, no Sunday early voting. So it seems to me when you compare Georgia against these blue states, Georgia has expanded voting. Georgia has tried to make it even more accessible and made it more accessible for people to vote, regardless of your skin color, background, language, whatever. 17 days versus 9. 2 Saturdays and 2 Sundays versus no Sundays. In states that did not have early voting. That's one of the things that actually surprised me, because when I found out that Delaware, and I happened to see this particular one, I didn't believe it. I was like, there's no way Delaware doesn't have early voting. I truly believe that all 50 states had early voting. I was under that impression. I'm here in Florida. They have early voting. Okay, Georgia has early voting. Texas has early voting. California has early voting. I just assumed that everyone had early voting, particularly that's not the case. Okay, in Delaware, when I looked this up, it says right here in the top, Delaware does not permit early voting. As of 2021, 38 states and the District of Columbia permitted early voting. So there's still a good handful of states that do not have early voting, as you saw in the slide before. And there seem to be blue states. There are some red states that don't have early voting. Don't get me wrong, it's not only just blue states. But the Democrats and the left are trying to pan this out as, oh my gosh, it's Jim Crow. We're trying to make it harder for black people to vote. So far, you're going to add a 5th and 6th Pinocchio to that claim. However, to Delaware's credit, if you want to give them credit for this, whatever, they're just behind the times. Delaware's governor, a Democrat, did sign into law in 2019 to start early voting. But that doesn't take effect until January 1st of 2022. So while they are going to get early voting, it's just not yet. But at least it's a step in the direction, and you could add another name to the list of states that actually have early voting. But they're only going to have it for 10 days. They're going to have it for at least 10 days of early voting. Now, granted, the population of Georgia is greater than that of Delaware. Understood. The most populous county in Delaware is, and I don't know this for a fact, but I'm going to probably assume my next paycheck that the most populous area of Delaware doesn't even come close to that of Fulton County or Cobb County or that whole surrounding area in just those 1 or 2 counties. Those 2 counties probably account for the entire state of Delaware. So I get why there's only 10 days of voting. But you can't say that Jim Crow, we're taking you back to the Jim Crow. If Delaware, a blue state, gets 10 days of voting, Georgia gets an entire 7 days more than that, but you're saying that it's racist and we're trying to prevent people from voting. So far, none of this holds water, and everything just looks like they're just complaining and trying to grandstand on everything. So, Stacey Abrams is one of the, as I mentioned earlier, Stacey Abrams is actually one of the ones that spearheaded this whole campaign against this particular law. Now, the only reason why she's doing this is because it's the person she lost to in the gubernatorial race back in 2018. She lost to Brian Kemp, and she still contends to this day that she won and she's the rightful governor and she never conceded, so forth and so on. But that's for a different video. But she did go to New Jersey, and she did go to help the voting rights over there. She went to try to establish some good voting rights over there for the people of New Jersey. So what did Stacey Abrams do? According to the headline, with Stacey Abrams, New Jersey puts on stronger voting rights into law. What will change? That's the headline. Stronger voting rights into law with Stacey Abrams' help. Okay, so what exactly did change? What exactly did New Jersey do to get stronger voting laws? Let's take a look. What is the early voting period? In-person voting begins up to 10 days before an election. Under the law, early voting starts 4 days before a non-presidential primary, 6 days before a presidential primary, and 10 days before a general election. In all contests, early voting ends on the Sunday before the election, which is technically the case, which is fine. But 10 days of early voting, and they consider that a strong for voter rights. 10 days before a general election, but 17 is going to take you back to Jim Crow. I may not be the smartest person in the world, but if I remember my math correctly, let's see, 17 is greater than 10. 17 is more than 10. 17 is greater than 10. 17, yeah, I'll go with Georgia being the better of the law and of the expansion and the overall voting rights. Georgia is kicking butt so far. So if it's not the early voting, okay, and it's not about the food and water and about the several of the provisions in the Georgia, maybe, just maybe, it has to do about voter ID. I think I got it. It's about voter ID. It's because only non-white people can't get ID. They can't figure out where to go. It's like this mythical unicorn that non-white people just can't seem to get an ID. And so I said, okay, let's go with that premise. I don't believe it, but let's go with that premise. All right. So let's look at the photo ID requirements in the United States in general. As of 2021, April of 2021, 35 states enforce or were scheduled to begin enforcing voter identification requirements. 20 of the 35 required voters to present photo identification at the polls. The other 15 accepted other forms of identification. And of course, it differs from state to state. So 35 states already enact some form of voter identification, whether it be a photo or some other means to prove who you are. Wow, 35 states are really racist. That means these 35 states have to be blue. And those 15, nah. Those 35 must be red and those 15 must be blue. Well, no. As you can see, no. So more than half, and there's 15 that apparently don't require any kind of identification at all. That's pretty bad. Identification should be across all 50 states. It should be universal. It should be like a federal minimum. Like you have to show an ID. You got to show an ID for anything you do. You got to show an ID to buy alcohol, buy cigarettes if they card you, to play in a casino if they card you, to rent a hotel room or get a hotel room, unless it's one of those pay by the hour ones, but those aren't my counting. I'm talking about if you go to a Marriott or Four Seasons, they're going to ask you for an ID. You want to board a plane? You want to get on a cruise ship? You want to go rent a car? You want to go buy a car? You want to buy a house? You want to rent a house? You're going to have to show some kind of form of identification. Now, I'm not talking about that very, very small sliver of people who actually work under the table and do everything under the table. I'm talking about those people who actually have ID and are capable of getting ID and actually do everything with ID. It's not hard. You can get an ID. But perhaps, maybe the claim is this. Maybe it's because an ID for a white person is either free or costs less than that of getting ID for a non-white person. Maybe a non-white person costs like $1 million and it's just unobtainable. Let's look into that claim. In Georgia, where the controversy is, a voter ID card can be issued at Georgia Department of Driver Services offices free of charge. To receive a free Georgia voter identification card at Georgia, voters must provide so forth and so on. In that very first line, as you can read, an original or certified document to prove who you are. Prove who you are. It's not that hard. Brandon Tatum, who was a former police officer in Tucson, Arizona, he said, I would be talking to homeless people. I would talk to probably people who have probably the lowest income or no income at all. And they had identification. If they can get it, what's your excuse? And it's true. What exactly is your excuse for not getting ID? Georgia's going to give you a free ID if you can just prove who you are. An ID just for the sake of voting. Just for the sake of voting, they're going to give it to you for free. Now, of course, it costs the taxpayers and blah, 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 but you're going to get it for free. They're not going to charge you. You want to get a driver's license, it's like $30, or a state ID card, it's like $25 or something like that. But you want to get an ID just for the sake of voting? Free. I must have missed the part where it says it's only for non-white people are free. No, it didn't say that. So it must be free for anybody who can prove that they're a resident of Georgia and they can prove that they are who they are. Are you John Doe? Do you live at XYZ location? Can you prove that you are John Doe and that you're XYZ location? Great, here's your ID. You could be in and out in probably a half hour. I had to prove, when I went to go change my address, when I bought my first house in Miami, I actually had to prove that I am a resident of where I'm claiming to be a resident from when I went to the DMV. I was at the DMV. I told them I need to change my address. I actually had to go back home to get the proof and bring it back. That added my time. Did I complain? Did I say racism? Did I say, no, you have to take my word for it, I'm white. I'm white, just give it to me. No, I didn't claim racism. I had to go prove that I live where I live and that I am who I am. It's not that hard, people. Grow up and take responsibility. Here is a quote from Ken Blackwell. It never ceases to amaze me that Democrats believe African Americans don't have and aren't capable of obtaining an ID, especially since you need an ID to do routine things such as open a bank account, drive a car, board a flight, or pick up tickets at a will call window at Yankee Stadium or Fenway Park. Most Americans have identification, and those who don't can quickly get one, as states such as Georgia provide free IDs to anyone who needs one. I just showed you directly from the Department of Driver Services in Georgia. The link is down below. Go check it out. It's directly from their site. All I did was just screenshot it for you. You can get a voter ID for free. It's not that hard. Okay? So, I wanted to hear people I love hearing people debate about this. Here's a video of Candace Owens debating with Hawk Newsom about the very thing of voter ID. Check it out.
Not only did the Republicans give up around the 1960s on getting the black vote, but they have actively sought to oppress the black vote.
Okay, so
you look at most of these the voting issues. You look at voter suppression, right? And it's Republicans behind this. Now, you said if I was right, you'd admit it.
No, I'm just asking you to explain it further because I want people that are hearing you to hear.
There are laws like you have to do 3 black flips, 2 somersaults, and a moonwalk.
You mean have an ID?
Yeah, an ID.
So do you think black people? Let me ask you a question.
Do
you think black people are too stupid to get a driver's license?
Why would you call black people?
Because to me, I'm offended that people call that.
Black.
No, I'm asking you something.
Black.
I'm asking you something. I'm offended when people say to me that oppresses us. I'm like, I don't know a single black person that doesn't have ID. You can't drive. You can't buy a pack of cigarettes. You can't buy alcohol. Don't think we're so stupid that we can't figure out how to get ID. It's insulting to call that voter suppression.
Okay.
If black people can't figure out how to get ID, we have a way bigger problem. We're not.
If you can't get into voter ID, I love that line. If you can't get a voter ID, we have much bigger problems. Just like I said before, you can't figure out how to get an umbrella and take a bottle of water with you to the line, to a voting line or anywhere else. You got much bigger problems than that of trying to get an ID or anything else. You need to figure out some other things in your life before trying to figure out how to vote. All right. So I happen to come across another video. Here is Ami Horowitz, or it's Amy Horowitz. I'm not sure how to pronounce his first name. His first name is spelled AMI, Horowitz. The link is down below. The full YouTube video is down below. And all I did was this YouTube video. I'm going to show you the second half of this video. I do encourage you to see the entire first half. It is linked down below because he talks to white people about voter ID and about black people and IDs. In the second half of the video, which I'm about to show you, he goes to East Harlem, New York. And he goes and talks to random black people about IDs, about voter IDs, about the whole notion about black people and IDs. See it for yourself. Check it out.
East Harlem to ask black people their thoughts on what you just heard. Do you have ID normally? You carry ID around?
Yes, I have state ID.
Do you carry ID?
Yes, I do.
Do you know any black person who doesn't carry ID?
No. Everyone that I know has an ID. Why would they think we don't have ID?
That's a lie. Why would they say that?
Do you have ID?
Yes.
Because I have my ID and my friends have their ID, so like, we know what we need to carry around.
Everybody that I know have ID. Like, that's one of the things you need to walk around with New York with, an ID.
Do you know any black adult who does not have ID?
No, I don't.
Is it a weird thing to even say that?
Yes, it is.
What is this, some type of trick candy camera?
I know, right?
That's the only thing I brought with me.
Those are legit IDs. I heard a lot also that black people can't figure out how to get to the DMV.
Really?
What does that say to you?
I know it's that, it's on 25th Street.
Do you know where the DMV is around you?
It's on 125th Street and 3rd Avenue, I believe.
You know how to get there?
Yeah.
Would you have a problem getting there if you had to get there?
No.
I know these sound like silly questions. You know how to get to the DMV?
Of course.
You know where it is?
Yes.
You can get there?
Uh-huh.
No problem.
No problem.
Just checking.
Okay.
And I also heard a lot that black people, especially poor black people, have no access to the internet, can't figure out how to use the internet.
That's just stupidity, honestly. Everybody has access to the internet. Even a little kid can figure out how to work the internet.
I had access to the internet for years.
You know how to use it properly, right?
Exactly. I do it at work. So, of course, I know how to use it. My kids know how to use it. They all have iPads, iPods, whatever.
Your phone has data?
Mm-hmm.
You can actually
Unlimited.
Unlimited data.
Mm-hmm. I use my phone as a hotspot.
What does that say to you for the people who have this perception of black people?
They're pretty much ignorant. That's what my thought process was.
I just think that's ignorant. Ignorant.
Ignorant. That's the word I'm hearing a lot.
Ignorant.
Ignorant.
Very, very ignorant.
Does it sound racist for somebody to say that?
I think it is a little racist because, you're putting people in a category and you have no idea what you're talking about.
Maybe a little bit of racist in it, but like I said, I think it's more stupidity and ignorance.
You're judging somebody, but you're judging them because they black, saying that they don't got it.
What people are they talking to? Who are these people talking to?
Do you have a problem that if you go to vote and they say, can we please see your ID to make sure you are who you say you are? Are you
Love
cool?
showing my ID.
You got no problem with that?
Nope.
Would you have a problem if when you go to vote, if they say, can we please just see your ID to make sure you are who you say you are? Do you have an issue with that?
No.
Would you have a problem if there was a rule where you had to show your ID in order to vote?
I don't think so. No.
Would you have an issue if there was a rule saying you got to show your ID before you vote?
So, are you disbelieved yet? Or do you really believe that black people or anybody that's non-white still can't get an ID, or they can't figure out how to get one, or it's just so hard? Look at all these barriers and look at all the somersaults, like Hawk Newsom says. No, it's called you go take your butt over to the DMV, go get yourself an ID, get the documents, go. They'll give it to you. Sometimes it's for free. Sometimes you have to pay $20, $30, whatever it is. Go get yourself an ID. It's not that hard. It's actually extremely easy. So, the voter ID thing is a non-issue. The line in the water is a non-issue. The hours and expansions, we already debunked that whole thing. So what exactly of this Georgia law are people all up in arms about? It's only because they made it more political because it's a Republican governor that signed this into law. I already showed you in previous slides, and I encourage you to go look back at it again, that Georgia expanded voting. They're making it easier for people to vote. They're making it harder for people to cheat. That's the whole point of having a democracy. That's the whole point of having a constitutional republic, that you want to limit the cheating to the bare minimum so it doesn't affect the integrity of the actual election. Now listen, anything from a local election to the general election, there's always going to be some form of fraud, some form of voter fraud at some level, but usually it's so minuscule that it's not going to slide the election either way. The reason why this law and these laws have to be in place is because of what we saw in 2020. The integrity has to be there. People have to be able to trust the voting system, and they have to be able to trust that their vote is going to count. And it's not going to be canceled out by fraud. Because if we don't have that integrity, if people don't have that trust, we don't have a country. Okay? Now, because of what Governor Kemp signed, there happened to be some backlash. Not just backlash from Biden and the Democrats and Stacey Abrams. That was it. That's expected. That was expected to happen. But what happened is that in 2021, the MLB, Major League Baseball's AllStar Game, was going to be in Atlanta, Georgia. The reason why I said was is because now they moved it from Atlanta to Colorado because of the election law that was signed by George Kemp, stating that, oh, we need to be all inclusive. We need to, everybody needs to have the right to vote and blah, blah, blah. Well, guess what? Major League Baseball just pulled out an event that costed the city potentially $100 million plus in revenue for an area in Cobb County and Fulton County, and all that area. The whole area is 51% black. They just costed black-owned businesses, black employees, $100 million plus in potential revenue for those two counties. MLB said, we're going to go ahead and take it to Colorado, to Denver, to an area that's less than 10% black and majority is white. Do you feel played yet? Here's an article from Outkick discussing such thing. According to Outkick, when MLB decided to move the game from Atlanta to Colorado, it was going to cost more than $100 million. Atlanta, that whole area, was going to lose $100 million in revenue, in tourism dollars, basically. And that's according to the Cobb County Travel and Tourism Bureau. The big part of the loss of income is reported 8,000 hotel rooms that will no longer be needed. Now, I spent 10 straight years in the hospitality business. I worked at front desk and housekeeping. I was a director of services until the day I left. I could tell you right now, 8,000 hotel rooms for a Major League All-Star Game was going to be at the bare minimum. I was working in hotels when the MLB All-Star Game came to Miami. And I can tell you right now, a lot more than 8,000 hotel rooms were booked. Why? You still have all the players that are traveling to the All-Star Game, their family, agents, owners. You have all the media, all the vendors. You need a lot more than 8,000 hotel rooms. And that's per night. That's not even total. That's per night. For at least 3 to 4 nights on average. Some fans will only be there for 2 to 3. And the media will be there, 4, 5, 6 days because of having to set up all the equipment, so forth and so on. So you lost out, I would say, closer to 200 million than 100 million. I would say you lost closer to 200 million in revenue between all the restaurants, retail, all the ticket sales, paychecks that were lost, tax revenue that was lost there for Georgia and the city and state, whatever they taxed there. People lost income that they were hoping to count on, because that area in every state, in every area, needs a boost, needs a big old jolt in the economy. And MLB just yanked that away from an area that's 51% black. But they care about the black vote. They care about the black people. But that's how they're going to play you. Listen. Brian Kemp said it best. And I'm not a fan of Brian Kemp, but this is what he said when MLB decided to move the All-Star Game from Atlanta to Colorado. A sad reminder of the millions of dollars lost for hardworking Georgians thanks to Stacey Abrams, Joe Biden, and the woke mob lies. For those of you who are keeping track, Georgia has 17 days of early voting. Colorado has 15. When it comes to cancel culture, facts don't matter. And that's a fact. Everything I presented to you was a fact. Everything I presented to you is down below in the description section and linked down below. Check it out. Read it for yourself. Don't take my word for it. Go do your own homework. Go do your own research. And you're going to find out. I guarantee you're going to find out. If you have an honest mind, if you're able to put anything political aside, I guarantee if you have a fair mind and you're going to balance the two, I guarantee you that every person opposing this bill that was signed and calling it what it is full of bullcrap. You like what I heard? Didn't like what I heard? What are your comments down below? Subscribe to the channel. What did I miss? What do you want me to discuss? Did I miss anything? Let me know. Let me know down below. Until then, check me out.